Hey guys, my name is Blaze and welcome back to our ongoing Beginners RPG tutorial series. And in case you haven't already realized, we are working here today in Photoshop. Just give me a sec, I'm going to move my microphone just a little bit out of the way. There we go, I think that's better. And what we are going to be working on, in case you haven't already seen in this window here, is a series of mannequins or blank sprite templates. Now before I actually begin, some parts of this will be fast forwarded. That's because we'll be just working on creating these sprites or something like these particular sprites today. Now some parts will be fast forwarded because it's just a bit too much to compress it all into one video. And there really are just some points that I want to focus on, like some explanations. So I hope that you can learn something from this video. And if you have any questions, of course, you can always leave them in the area below, in the comment section below. So what we are going to do, let's first set up. This is our goal, to create 3 sprites here. We're going to create a down-facing sprite, an up-facing sprite, and one facing the right. For GameMaker, generally speaking, most people just create a right-facing sprite and then flip that, copy and paste it, flip it, and then they will have their left-facing sprite. But that's completely up to you. If you want to make 4 unique directions, then by all means do so. That's up to you as a game developer to make that decision. Now, before we actually get into starting, why have we got a sprite here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different colors? Well, the reason being because this is how a lot of people go about creating pixel art or pixel art mannequins for things like outfit design. So if they're creating something like customizable armor, you might have a piece of headgear armor that you can put on separately from the body. And having a mannequin will allow you to essentially zone it so that it helps you just focus on getting the details right. Another use for creating a mannequin is actually for animations. It makes it a lot easier to create animations for your characters based off of a mannequin, because you're not dealing with weird details like lighting and things like that. You're focusing mainly on the form, so the actual shape, what it looks like. And so you're not distracted by all these tiny little details that, you know, will probably sidetrack you from getting the job done. So by creating a mannequin like this, you can focus on the actual task at hand, whether it be animating, creating armor, creating custom sprites as well. These mannequins are also useful because these are basically going to be the, and I put this in quotation marks, the average sprite size. So our character sprites will be more or less the same as this one here, but we're just going to be starting from scratch. Now in the first video, again, before we start, just get some preparation down and underway. In the first video, what we had, or what we created, was a 32 high by 32 wide square. And that was our, again in quotation marks, player sprite. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use a formula that I kind of use as a guideline. It doesn't mean that you have to follow it strictly, but this guideline is basically height. So the height of our sprite is equal to the width times 2, give or take some. Because if you think about it, if you have a human-sized sprite or a humanoid sprite, it's going to be kind of hard to squash them into a 32 by 32 square perfectly. It doesn't mean that it's impossible, it's just going to look kind of funny, kind of weird. So what we're going to do today is we're going to create something like this, but slightly different. Now again, we're going to be, well, I'm going to be fast forwarding some parts, but don't worry, I will overdub the sections that are fast forwarded so I can get some extra points across. So let's begin first with the down facing. Again, keep in mind that we are working with a formula of height equals width times 2. So it'll probably look something like I don't know, something like this. Something like that would be the case. Yeah, more or less. So that's what it's going to look like, ish. Alright, so let's begin with the down-facing sprite. We usually start with that. Okay, so what I'm working on here first, and this is running at 3 times speed, is the torso. If there's one thing that you need to know about designing the mannequin, is that it's going to be the basis for measuring everything else in your game. So instead of having a rectangle, you would have this in its place. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to get the torso to look just the way I want it to, or rather not the torso, the entire sprite. Because like I said, this mannequin is going to be the basis of all the measurements in the entire game that we're going to be working on. So things like objects that are smaller need to be smaller in relation to our mannequin sprite. On the other end of the scale, you've got things that are larger. So things like, I don't know, like a giant Cyclops dragon or something like that. Look, I don't know. I haven't thought about what kind of monsters we'll have, but basically this is going to be our basic sprite or our average sprite, right? And most people, when you think average, think humans. And so that's what most pixel designers or most pixel artists, when they're working on a game, tend to do. I haven't worked with pixel art in a while. It's been a long time, actually. Almost, my first pixel art job was probably 2006, 2007. I was working on like a small commercial project. I was still in high school, actually, when I started it. But a friend of mine, he was much older than me. No, he is much older than me. He decided to make a game using pixel art. And so he paid me. I got paid for that. That was nice. But that was the first time. And I think on a commercial project, that was the only time that I worked on pixel art. So this is all it's kind of new, but it's also kind of like a refresher for me anyway. So the key areas that you should be focusing on when you're creating your down-facing mannequin, or when you're creating your mannequin in general, would have to be the proportions of the torso, the legs, and the head. The arms, they're important, but they're not as important as the legs and the torso, because they can be adapted to suit whatever, really. And so that's something that you should keep in mind, is that the main focus of the down view would be the torso, the legs, and the head. And what you can see now is basically me just trying to figure out what kind of leg shape I want, what kind of perspective do I want the players to have when they see the sprite. You can see here that the arms, I'm just trying to get it to fit to the rest of the body. They're not actually a focal point. In fact, the arms should never be a focal point when it comes to designing your sprites at all. They are important. What I'm saying is they are important, but they should never be the focal point. They are just weird sticks. Like at the end of the day, they're just weird sticks that they're just attached to the human body. They don't really, they are important for your pixel characters, but unfortunately they're not easy. They're not easy to get right, especially when you're working in top down. So when you're working on arms and hands, just keep them as rectangular or circular blobs, as a mannequin anyway. And even with the final art, that can still pass. Just having them as rough blobs with some shadows, they will pass as hands very easily. So you can see here now that I'm working on the hips of the character. Now keep in mind that you do have masculine and feminine frames, so keep those shapes in mind when you're designing your sprites. Okay, that might not always be the case, but you never know. And so I'm more focused on getting the legs and the torso to fit the entire sprite more than the arms. You can see here that I'm just kind of making small adjustments to make sure that the arms work with the rest of the body. And yes, I'm focusing a bit on the arms now, but the entire time that I was actually working on it is how do the arms connect? How do the perspective of the arms affect the perspective of the sprite as a whole? And then I just deleted it because I actually thought of what if I changed the height completely? And you can see here at that point that I made earlier about just working with blobs for the arms. You can see that it works, or how I get around that situation. And it's kind of messy. It's really messy working with arms. They're a bit complicated. They're more complicated than working with the torso or legs. But really, it just comes down to practice. So once you're happy with your mannequin, your down-facing mannequin, the up direction should not be a problem at all. The challenging thing here is if you're working with 8 directions, I'm only going to be working with 4, but if you're working with 8 directions, it's not going to be tough. You're just going to have to work a little bit more than people that are just working with 4. But at the end of the day, if you can pull it off really well, then you'll have something that looks really good. You'll have an extra 4 directions to play with. That just means more work, but yeah, like I said, if you can pull it off really well, then I think you're set. So I'm just making minor adjustments to make sure that everything kind of fits, everything suits each other really well. And the beauty of doing the down direction is that if you make a mistake, you can very easily just delete half of it and copy paste and make the adjustments necessary. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this part. Okay, so I think this is about as close as I'm gonna get to having it finished, or in the time that I have at least to get a sprite finished. And what I've done here is I've created my sprite or my mannequin. And what we're going to do now is we're going to check roughly where it stands in comparison to its collider or its intended collider. And we can see here that the sprite is just slightly taller than the actual collider itself, and the arms are slightly wider. In general, this is kind of what you want to achieve. Okay, I say kind of because obviously everybody's project is going to be different. Everybody's game is going to be just a little bit, not overly different to each other, but there are going to be some differences here. Generally, when it comes to creating your colliders and things like, and your actual sprites, you want to make the game as fair to the player as possible. You can make it challenging, but you still need to be fair with them. So here we've got just a little bit of empty space where they could get hit, but really 1 pixel when you're playing it in game is really not that much of a difference. And so when it comes to collisions anyway, so for now I think this is acceptable. In between this video and the next video, I will probably change this up to make it suit the project a little bit better. But as long as you have the points, the main points of what we're trying to achieve here, I think you should be at a point where you can create your own sprite that's adaptable or suitable for you guys. Now, when it comes to creating the other 2 views that we're working on today, so the up-facing and the side-facing, really down and up, the sprites for them, they're pretty much the same. So if we take our mannequin, remember, we're just going to be working on these mannequins for now. We're not going to actually put some details in. That will come at a later stage when we actually start working on these details. So what I've done is I've just copied the sprite across. I'm gonna flatten those two layers together. And basically, to make the up facing distinct from the down facing, all you really have to do is make some slight changes to the actual sprite itself. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding what essentially the back of the neck here, and I'm flattening this area out here around the hips. So basically where the bum should be. And of course with the feet, we need to change the orientation so that they're actually facing the other way. And with a sprite this small, the changes are probably not going to be more than a pixel. So really, by just moving some pixels around, I've already created an up-facing sprite. So it's quite easy to make that. Now the next stage is going to be a little bit more difficult, and that's the side-facing view. So like in this example above, let me just center that. In this example above here, we have two main lines. Basically, they're going to be our indicators of the maximum height and the absolute bottom here. Some extra landmarks that you might want to take a note of would be the crotch height. So basically here, this line here, and maybe the chin, where the chin is. So really, you can have more lines if you absolutely wanted to, but unlike the up and down sprites, the side one, you kind of have to start again with how you create them. So you kind of have to build it from scratch, unfortunately. You can't really cheat the side view. But a quick tip before I speed the video up again, is it doesn't have to be completely accurate. All right, so when you're drawing your side sprite, all you have to do is get a rough resemblance to the front, the down and up facing sprites. The reason being because if it has very different looking dimensions, it's going to look weird for when the player turns around. A good way to test that is by creating a turnaround animation and seeing if it works or if it doesn't. But for now, let's just keep to this. I will fast forward the video again so that you can actually get the key points of what I'm trying to do. And I will talk to you guys at the end. Okay, so these extra lines here are basically lines for the crotch and for the chin. And they're optional. They're completely optional. When you're doing the side view and you're putting those guidelines in, the only important lines are the green ones, so the top and bottom. Really, the side with the crotch and chin one, they're kind of like the minimum, but like if you get more confident, the more confident you get with your pixel art, I would suspect the fewer lines that you'll need. Again, what's important here is the head and the torso, but another key point that you need to take into account with the side view is actually its proportion to the rest of the body. You don't want it to look too thick or too thin, and so you kind of have to, I guess, mess around, like try to approximate and test out the size of the sprites to make sure that it actually works together. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to guess or trying to measure the size of the head or what it would look like from the side. And here's another thing that a lot of people do is add that extra leg. So the other side of the leg, well, it doesn't look that realistic in terms of, I guess, real life perspective. But by adding that extra leg there, the green leg, we'll call it the green leg. By adding that green leg, you essentially give the players or the people playing your game a sense of depth. And it's not realistic. By no means does it look realistic, but it is something that you should take into account when you are creating your sprites. So here we go. This next part here, I'm just creating like a small animation here. just testing the proportions out, making sure that everything works. And if it does, then I end it there. So a lot of people call that a turnaround, a sprite turnaround. And if you're concerned about what happens next, don't worry, everything will be explained super soon. So just hold on a sec. Okay, so we're pretty much done here, and if you were watching that last few seconds, you could probably see that I was testing out the sprite rotations. And basically what that does is, like I said earlier, you want to keep the proportions as close to each other as possible when you're doing the side view. So by essentially what I did was this, right? So I copied the down view, Control J, put it onto its own little space, and then I copied this one here, the side view, grab that, put that not roughly, but has to be in alignment with the actual feet have to be aligned, because otherwise it's gonna look weird. So you want all your sprites to look, I guess, just right. And so what I do now is just flip that across, and that should work there. Okay, so what I've gone ahead and done is basically, if we open up the timeline, and I am working here in Photoshop, so keep that in mind. What I'm doing here is I've got the down facing, and then for slide 2, I have right, and then for slide 3, I have up, and then for frame 4, I have the left facing. And basically what I'm doing is I'm making sure that when I play it, we don't have too much difference. There's not much of a difference in terms of the shape of the body. So if we change the delay to 0.2 instead of 0.1, that's a bit fast. Yeah, there's not much of a difference in terms of shape. So I think we're safe in terms of the shape of the body. I do have to fix the side view for the head, but that's really not much of a fix that we have to make. So that's one way that you can check the consistency of the shape of your sprites. Because if you're following this tutorial series, we are working on an action RPG, and so we have to be able to work with multiple angles, especially if you're working with 8 angles, so not just up, down, left, and right, but also the 45-degree angles as well. If you're working with 8 directions, then it's even more important that you get the shapes just right. So that's all for me. That's all for this video. In the next one, we'll actually import these into the actual game itself. So we'll be back in GameMaker, and we're going to start programming the different directions that we're going to be moving. So we won't just be working with blocks, basically. We'll be working with these directional sprites. I'm gonna go ahead and clean these up a bit, and like I said, in the next video we'll be back in GameMaker, and we will be working with the sprites that you have created and the sprites that I have created. So that's all for me. If you have any questions, if you're having a little bit of trouble, I know I had some trouble working with sprites today, but if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That's what it's for. But for now, that's all from me. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you later. Bye.